Good evening, everyone,
Good evening.
and welcome to this general membership meeting of the NAACP. I want to welcome members and guests, and a special welcome to the incumbent Berkshire District Attorney, Andrea Harrington, and candidate for District Attorney, Tim Shugrue. Thank you both for agreeing to join us this evening. Before we begin this evening, I want to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Tanisha Sullivan, the president of the Boston branch of the NAACP. She's going to make a brief presentation. Tanisha is running for Secretary of State to help lead the fight to protect and expand voting rights, create a more transparent and accessible government, and foster greater economic opportunity for everyone in Massachusetts. Please welcome Tanisha Sullivan.
Thank you so much, Dennis, President Powell, and the entire Berkshire County NAACP. It is good to be here with you and your neighbors in Berkshire County, and especially good to be here with you this evening to share a little bit about why I'm running for Secretary of State. Certainly, I believe we have a screen share coming up. Did we mean to do that? There we go. Certainly, the work that we have the opportunity to do in and through the NAACP and so many other organizations at the community-based level really speak to the power of community, the power of people, everyday people, to engage deeply in our democracy, taking on some of the deepest challenges that exist in our communities: educational equity, economic opportunity, health equity, the fight for environmental and climate justice, and of course the right for voting, the fight for voting rights. Everyday people really leaning in, working to identify the solutions that can really help to transform our communities. I grew up in Brockton. I am the daughter of a public school educator and a small business owner. I'm in my 20th year of legal practice, and as Dennis has shared, certainly have had a very deep experience working within our civil rights organizations here in Massachusetts. I believe that the Office of Secretary of State is probably one of the least known offices in our state government with the most important responsibility, really helping to protect and advance our democracy. I believe that this office has tremendous potential to help us advance economic, racial, and social justice in ways that we just haven't seen before. I believe that today, when so many of us are feeling disconnected, disappointed, and deeply concerned about the state of our democracy, the attack on our small d democratic institutions, Congress being hyperpolarized, the Supreme Court rolling back rights that so many of us and our parents and our grandparents fought so very hard for, it's critically important that here in the states, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and in communities around the Commonwealth, we are doing what we can in our local communities to help not only protect but to advance democracy. That means having a Secretary of State who can partner with our communities to help increase voter participation rates. Here in Massachusetts, we have deep voter participation gaps impacting our gateway cities, impacting our BIPOC communities, working families, low-income communities at incredibly high rates. The Secretary of State's office has an important role to play in addressing that issue. We need to continue to fight to break down administrative barriers to the ballot box. We need to continue to fight for voting rights like same-day or election day registration. We need to continue to open up opportunities for municipalities to explore in the democracy space with voting flexibilities like ranked choice voting. But we also need to ensure that our government, through the Secretary of State's office, is doing the tough work of restoring trust, broken trust that exists primarily between some of our most vulnerable communities in our government, broken trust that leads people to say and believe that their vote doesn't count, that it doesn't matter who they vote for. People who are elected do their own thing. That is going to require the work of a Secretary of State who understands our communities, has worked in our communities, and is willing to work alongside our local community-based organizations and our local elected officials to really connect with the people of Massachusetts to build and restore trust that can lead to strengthened relationships so that we can inspire, motivate, and encourage folks to cast their ballot and to participate in our democratic processes. Breaking down administrative barriers to the ballot box remains critically important. It is the fight, it is the work that our organization has been doing, and we must continue to do it. But we also need to add on to that the human part of it, the relationship part of it, that will really make the difference in helping us to increase voter participation. Because who votes determines who gets elected, and who gets elected has an outsized voice in the policies and laws that impact our lives every day. I hope that you'll take an opportunity to check out my website, TanishaSullivan.com, to learn more about me and to learn more about my vision for this office. In addition, we have 2 debates coming up next week that will be very exciting. The first will be on August 8th with CVB, the Boston Globe, and WBUR. That will be at noon on Monday, August 8th. And then another on GBH with Jim Browdy on August 10th. That will air at 7 p.m. I encourage folks to listen in and to watch both of them if you're able to. Again, I'm Tanisha Sullivan. I am a candidate for Secretary of State here in Massachusetts, and I hope to have the opportunity to engage with you all in person very soon. Thanks so much, President Powell.
Thank you very much, Tanisha. Just really inspiring and great. Helen, I'm going to turn it over to you so that we can start this evening's agenda, which is very exciting also.
Great, thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Tanisha. So this month we have the ACLU of Massachusetts here with us again, and this month's presentation is what a difference a DA makes. I recall attending this 2 years ago with Rasan Hall, and I learned so much from that presentation that I did not know about district attorneys and district attorney races prior to that. And so I think we're so fortunate to have the ACLU here to do that presentation again. And then, as you all know, we have the incumbent district attorney, Andrea Harrington, and the candidate, Tim Shugrue, here for a forum that our friend Meg Bossong will be moderating for us after that. So I want to do a quick intro of our presenters first. So it's Javi and Liv from the ACLU of Massachusetts. Javi is an organizing strategist and community advocate. He joined the ACLU of Massachusetts in 2017, coordinating the Immigrant Protection Project, where his role was to support immigrant families and coordinate access to regional resources and family preparedness documents. During this time, he and a team of local attorneys also worked on parole and bond cases locally and at the southern border. Currently, Javier's work focuses on multiple issues across the organization, spanning from racial justice to technology and civil rights. He is based in Western Massachusetts and works on municipal and statewide advocacy and campaigns. Prior to joining the ACLU, Javier served as a liaison, interpreter, and education specialist for the Northampton school system. Javier was a political advisor and organizer in Santiago, Chile, and Buenos Aires, Argentina. And then we have Olivia, who is also a community outreach strategist with the ACLU. Olivia joined the field team at the ACLU of Massachusetts also in 2017, where she helps to manage and develop the ACLU's growing activist base. She brings with her a background in community organizing, leadership development, and coalition building. Prior to joining the ACLU, Olivia served as lead organizer of the Long Island Progressive Coalition in New York, where she organized a range of economic justice issues, including the Fight for 15, and organized for fair election reforms. Olivia received a BA in sociology and geography from Binghamton University in New York. Thank you so much, Olivia and Javi, for being here. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Helen. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So over the next half hour or so, Javi and I are going to give you some information about the role and the power of the district attorney to get you thinking about questions to ask our two candidates here today, and to hopefully give you a broader base of knowledge when you think about the role of the DA. We call this public education campaign What a Difference a DA Makes. It was first started in 2018, again, to educate voters about the role and the power of district attorneys in our communities. So before we get started, I just want to pose a couple of questions to think about, and I'm going to ask the question and encourage you to just think about what the answer might be for a few seconds, and then I will give everybody the correct answer. So our first question is, what percentage of DA races statewide went uncontested in the last 20 years? So just take a second to answer that question for yourself, and then I will give us the correct answer. All right, so the correct answer is 77%. So in the last 20 years, 70% of DA races statewide went uncontested. And oftentimes when races are uncontested, we can lack dialogue about the policies that are at stake in that election. And so I'm thrilled today that we're able to host this candidate forum alongside the NAACP in Berkshire County, so we can really get a sense of where the candidates stand on the different issues that you care about. The next question is, who are district attorneys accountable to? This was an answer that I did not know myself when I first started learning about this, back in 2018, right around when Helen was starting to learn about the DA as well. I wasn't sure who district attorneys were accountable to. So let's think about that for a second, and then I'll give us the right answer. So the correct answer is the voters. And I think this is a tricky question because sometimes we often think that there might be another government body that can hold district attorneys accountable. And although district attorneys interact with other government bodies in the state, at the end of the day, it's really the voters that hold them accountable. It's voters who put DAs in office. It's voters who could take DAs out of office. And so voters have the power here to really elect a candidate that represents their values. Just to zoom in a little bit to Berkshire County, over the last, since 1978, so about 12 election cycles between then and now, there have been 5 contested Democratic primaries and 2 contested general elections. It's actually much higher than other counties across the state, but still low considering that we've gone through 12 election cycles since then. So that's some data to think about, and I'm going to pass it over to Javier, who's going to tell us a little bit more about specifically what DAs do.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much to the NAACP, to the League of Women Voters for putting this together. This is really good. We already did one about sheriff, and that was extremely interesting. We got, over 120 participants. Now I'm going crazy seeing that we have 193 people participating. The ACLU is a nonpartisan organization. We do not endorse any candidate. And what we're doing with What a Difference a DA Makes and Know Your Sheriff, those 2 campaigns, is educate the public. Those are 2 roles, the sheriff role and the DA role, that are extremely powerful in the criminal legal system. And the sheriff gets elected every 6 years. The DA gets elected every 4 years. So it's really important for people to really know when they are going to vote, that they are voting their convictions, that they are voting their values. And that's intention that we have to put in this together in partnership with the NAACP Berkshire's branch and also the League of Women Voters. As I said, they are elected every 4 years. They are county-based, right? There are 11 counties. We have 11 district attorneys, and they are only accountable to the voters, right? The DA makes a lot of decisions, a fair amount of decisions that decide where the criminal legal system heads into it, from mandatory minimum for charging decisions to bail, public safety, and even advocating for criminal law reform. We're going to talk a little bit about this, but essentially what I'm inviting you on this presentation in this educational forum is to use this as a brain teaser. Immediately after this, we're going to have the two candidates for Berkshire DA. And I think this is a good starting point for us to think about questions, to think about those questions, to be able to ask those questions and start getting to know the candidates. We're going to see what they do, right? They decide who gets charged with a crime and how most criminal cases are resolved. So in Massachusetts, police apply for criminal charges at the district court upon arresting an individual, right? Once the court issues the charges, the local district attorney's office can then decide if they will prosecute or not. Certain crimes require the DA to present evidence to a grand jury that will issue an indictment for superior court cases. In those cases, the DA office also decides whom to seek indictment against and what charges to seek indictment for. This is extremely important because this is, and maybe some of you would have heard when we talk about mandatory minimums, right? For those that don't know, mandatory minimums are certain offenses that carry a statutory minimum mandatory sentences, right? That means that if convicted, the defendant cannot be sentenced to anything less than the mandatory minimum. And why this is important? Because when we're talking about the DA deciding who gets charged and how they get charged, comes down to the point that a little percentage of cases that come in front of the DA ends court.
I was saying, right? Tonight, and we can do a red or white.
Mute yourself. Thank you so much. A little percentage goes to court, and the reason is because they are plea bargain deals, right? And that decides a lot of who is going to end up in jail. And mandatory minimums, what it does is certainly give leverage to the DA to be able to put pressure in a defendant. And many times, not many times, but what we can see on this kind of dynamics is that even people who are not guilty may take the deal with the DA because they don't want to risk it and go to trial. So this is huge in the community. And even more because the United States is a country that has a massive amount of population incarcerated, and even a larger percentage of population in Black and Latino folks incarcerated, right? They decide whether the system treats people differently based on race and class. So we talk a lot about when we're talking about, sentences, the sentence disparity, right? A sentence disparity is when a person of color commits an offense and a white person commits an offense. And it's statistically, one of the things that we can see during those situations is that the person of color with the same factual events in their case gets a harder sentence. This also involves the selection of the jury. This also involves who you're charging. And I think that this is, I'm gonna throw some data in relation to it because I do think this is extremely interesting. So the Prison Policy Initiative is an organization based in Massachusetts that came out with these numbers. So in Massachusetts, 275 people in jail are in jail per 100,000 people in population, right? So 275 people in jail per 100,000 people in the community. If we talk about the average on the US, we're talking about 675 people in jail per 100,000 people. But we need to be really careful when we start talking about numbers, mostly because probably people here that I know who are really, they know about this, they would say, probably you don't want to see the US when you're talking about sentences, when you're talking about massive incarceration, right? And so we said 775 people in jail per 100,000 people in the US, 275 people in jail per 100,000 people, right? Let's not take a look to the US, right? Let's take a look to a different country. Let's go to the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has 129 people in jail per 100,000. That's literally less than half of Massachusetts, a country, the United Kingdom. So when we're talking about sentences disparity in the treatment of people differently, when we're talking about race, color, of ethnicity, it's hugely important. And the instructions and the preparation that the DA does with their assistant district attorney team that person has is vital, right? So because these are elected officials, the community can ask the right questions and can also get the answers, right? And also can push the elected official to a position that the community wants to see happening. The ACLU believes in a non-punitive system, right? A system that recognizes that the use of the substance abuse use is a health issue, not a criminal issue. And those are kind of situations when the DA is faced with charging somebody that has exactly that issue, to either treat it in a punitive manner or seeking alternatives to detention and alternative treatment, right? Sentencing recommendations. Certainly, we would talk about this sort of self-explanatory, right? There was a couple years ago, there was a DA, I think a decade ago, there was a DA who would say that he would always go for the harshest possible sentence and would ask that sentence to the judge. Doesn't matter what it is. And, you know, and that's sort of that old way that, you know, we need to be harsher with people because in that way, you know, things are going to get better. People are going to be safer. But the reality is that they are all of nuances in relationship to charging people with substance abuse or mental health issues, right? And we want to deviate from a punitive system. One of the things with the ACLU is that we don't talk about the criminal justice system. We talk about the criminal legal system, because we firmly believe that justice is still hard to be found in this carceral system. The civil asset forfeiture, it's really simple. If somebody gets a stop and that person has money because, you know, they went to the bank, got money, and that person gets arrested, whatever was found in their possession can be withheld by the cops and by the system, even when the person has not been charged yet. And that's complicated. And I would sort of invite, there's extremely good reading about civil asset forfeiture in relation to the Holyoke Police Department that happened recently, probably around 2 weeks ago. If you Google that, you're going to be able to find it. I talk a little bit about the criminalization of addiction. The ACLU is advocating firmly in alternatives to policing. We do not want corresponders. Corresponders are not good for our community. Thinking that in alternative to policing, a social worker or a clinician is going to be able to override a police officer, that's not going to happen, right? We need community answers to community issues, right? And the ACLU has been advocated for alternatives, community-based non-armed responders. That's what we need. In the same case, when we're talking about the criminalization of addiction or the criminalization even of mental health problems, what we're looking is a non-criminal treatment of it. Recognize that mental health is a health issue. Addiction is a health issue, and treat it like that, right? We're hoping to, with all the campaign that we're doing, all the material that we're putting out, that the community is going to read it. The community is going to start asking questions. And by the time that they go to the primaries, by the time they go to the general, they are highly acquainted with the policies of each candidate. And in that way, when they go to vote, they are going to vote, having in mind the values of their community. The last one that we're talking about is criminal justice reform. And this is really important. We're just coming out from the end of the legislative session, technically, right? Last Sunday, July 31st. When legislators are thinking about criminal justice reform, when we were working 2 years ago in the policing bill, legislators turn and look for advice of people like district attorneys. That's what they do, right? And they do it because of the experience of these elected officials. They do it because of the expertise of these elected officials. When that happens, we want to keep that the statements made by the district attorneys, the advices that the district attorney office is giving to local legislators are in accordance to community values, right? We're advocating for a non-punitive system, for a proactive system that addresses community issues with community answers, right? We're not looking for a highly sort of punitive reactionary system, which is what we have right now. One thing that we don't, I'm so sorry, Liv. I keep sort of bringing you back and forth.
Sorry, I keep anticipating, my bad. Go ahead.
Go 2017. So when we talk about the DA, and it's not here, but I was thinking a lot today, there's a lot of departments in the Commonwealth, the Sheriff Department, the DA office, the Secretary of State, right? One of the ways that we encourage the community to keep these officials and these offices accountable, it's the use of public record requests. But there is a problem with this. There is a dramatic difference between how one DA answers a public record request versus other DA. There is not a set standard, right? So sometimes we had found ourselves, in the eastern part of the states doing public record requests and waiting months and months and months and months for that. And we're talking about the ACLU, which is a big organization. And many times when our organization doesn't get those public records, we have to sue the department, right? Because that's the only way for us to get a court decision stating that we should be given those. So it's really important for us to be able to be cognizant of how our elected officials in every position, including the district attorney position, are allowing accessibility and transparency to the documents. When we're talking about data about demographics, right? When we're talking about data in the relationship with how many times, for example, assistant district attorneys are using bail as a punitive tool rather than what it's really for, which is just to make sure that the person comes back to the court, right? This is really important. And I want to stress this because if we're talking about in Liv said it, DAs are accountable to the voters because they are elected officials. If the supervisors of the district attorney, which is the community, is not doing their job, we are not going to be able to see somebody who is going to reflect the community. It's really simple. So I would invite in the exercise of healthy democracy to take all this information, to think about this information and use it to be able to shape your opinion, the way how you search for information, and the way how you also appreciate the candidates. And next slide. So this is really interesting. And this is data that we got from our former colleague, Taniqua, that was actually working with the NAACP in the Berkshires. So The Berkshire incarceration rate is 107.1 per 100,000. This is the highest in the Commonwealth. Certainly, probably in the upcoming weeks, I'm gonna submit a public record request to get sort of a more up-to-date information in relation to this. But this is sort of the closest number there that we have right now. And this. And the second point here, it's really important. Median bail amounts for African Americans in Berkshire County are 5 times higher than for white defendants. And this comes when we're talking about, the sentencing disparities. This is bail disparities, right? We firmly believe that bail should not be used in a punitive way. The role of bail is to make sure that the person comes back to court. It's really simple, right? So when we're talking about African Americans in Berkshire County having to pay 5 times more than white defendants for bail, we're talking about a country like the US that is extremely expensive to be poor. It's extremely expensive to be poor in the US. And that's a factual information, right? So what we want to see is a system that recognizes the bias, that recognizes the racial disparities, and they act accordingly to the values that we want to see. You can take a look to the numbers that we have here. I'm not going to sort of mention it, but we're going to be publishing soon District Attorney 101. It's a one-pager. On one side, you have District Attorney 101, and the other side, you have every single county with every single candidate. Also, it has a reminder about September 6th, which is the primary date, and the general election, which is November 8th. Liv, I'm going to turn it to you.
Thank you, Javi. So just to give you a couple of data points about Berkshire County elections before I turn it back to Helen to take us into our candidate forum. So just to give you some information about our last DA election in 2018, right? DAs are elected every 4 years. And so this is data from the Democratic primary, and the total votes cast in that election, around 21,000 votes. And I want to highlight what's in the parentheses next to that, which says that this is a 126% increase in votes, and that's in comparison to the 2014 election. And so we've seen a huge increase over the years, which is partially to do with, one, races being contested, and also the increased dialogue around what district attorneys do. Here on the bottom, there's information about how many blank votes there were. And so blank votes are when people are going out to the polls and they're voting for candidates who are closer to the top of the ticket, and they're not voting down ballot. And so between 2014 and 2018, we saw an 89% reduction in blank votes, which is wonderful, because there can often be a really big gap between voters who are going out to the polls to cast a ballot and people who are voting down ballot for a district attorney candidate. Fast forwarding to the 2018 general election, you might remember that Cacchiavello ran a write-in campaign, and the total votes cast in that election was about 54,000, which again is a 36% increase in votes between the 2018 election and the 2014 election. And then this last bit of data that I want to leave you with is just the comparison to how many registered voters there were in Berkshire County in 2018 at the time of this election. There were about 89,000 registered voters in the county, which is about 61% voter turnout. That's a pretty high number, but I want to really emphasize for folks on this call who might be volunteering for organizations who are going to be doing voter turnout for elections this fall, to really think about the gap that exists between the number of registered voters and how many people typically go out to the polls. I think there's a lot of opportunity to think about what is going to motivate people to go out and cast a ballot. This is a chart of all of the contested district attorney races across the state this year. The Cape and Islands, Berkshire County, Bristol County, Essex County, Plymouth County and Suffolk County will all have contested elections. We have 14 counties and only 11 DAs because some district attorneys represent more than one area. Franklin and Hampshire are together, as well as the Cape and Islands. And then to zoom out a little bit to everything that you're going to see on your ballot when you go to vote this year, there's quite a lot of positions up for election. And I've starred here, of course, the district attorney race and also the sheriff race that Javi mentioned earlier. It's a perfect storm this year because sheriffs are elected every 6 years, DAs are elected every 4 years, and both will be on the ballot. So again, the primary is on September 6th. The general election is on November 8th. And the two action items that I want to leave everyone with on this call today is one, of course, go out and vote. I know that's why you're all here. You're here to hear from the candidates, so you know who to cast your ballot for. And then I encourage you to really talk to your friends, your family, your neighbors about the role that the DA plays in our communities. Because although public dialogue has increased over the years, there are still a lot of people who are not familiar. And so I hope that you're able to take some of this information back to your own community and hope you learned something tonight that will help you a little bit as you hear from the two candidates. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Helen.
Great. Thank you so much, Liv and Javi. So we're going to jump right into it, and I'm going to pass things over to Meg Bossong, who is moderating for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Welcome again, everyone, and welcome to DA Harrington and Attorney Shugrue. I wanted to run down how we're going to move everything along tonight. So we're all 208 of us are clear on it, and folks know how to ask questions. So the most important thing is that this is a forum tonight. It's not a debate. It's an effort to educate voters and community members on issues, not necessarily to address specific issue positions of individual candidates. It's in many ways a more conceptual and philosophical conversation. So just so we know that's going to be the focus of the forum. We have several moderators working in different ways. So I am going to be the person relaying questions that are coming from you all, and just making sure that we are alternating folks appropriately. Behind the scenes, we are going to have folks monitoring time. So you will see that Kamar has different colored paper that he's going to hold up. So candidates will have 2 minutes each to answer each question. Green means you have 1 minute remaining. Orange means you have 30 seconds remaining, and red means you have 5 seconds remaining. And then Kamar is going to have a strong mute hand happening if folks go over time, because we have a lot of questions coming in and that will come in, and we want to make sure we get through them as quickly as possible. We're going to alternate who goes first for each question, and I'll direct that to each candidate. You'll each have a turn to go first on alternating questions. Please be respectful. Please note that we're not at this time calling out other candidates in your answer. If you are a staff member of a campaign, please take a step back. This is an opportunity for community members who don't normally have access to the candidates to pose questions, and is a space for candidates to highlight their qualifications and policy positions. So as an attendee, you might be wondering, how do I ask a question? That's a great thing to know. What you are going to want to do is to send a message to either Helen or Kamar, and they will paste your question into a background questions document that we have. And we'll, in that way, try to make sure that we're giving multiple people chances to ask questions and not focusing too much on any one question. Great. I think those were all the instructions. Does it seem like I missed anything? So the first thing that we're going to do is invite the two candidates to open with a 2-minute opening statement. And we are going to begin with the incumbent, District Attorney Andrea Harrington. So please go ahead.
Good evening. It's wonderful to be here. I want to thank the ACLU, the NAACP, and the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum, and a special thanks to Javi and Liv for their presentation. I've been in office for 3.5 years. I'm running on a record of accomplishments. I promised the district, Berkshire County, that I would use my power as district attorney to focus the resources of law enforcement on addressing violent crime, improving public safety through getting people who need treatment for substance use disorder, mental health issues, who are in the legal system because of poverty, into pathways for recovery and rehabilitation. And I'm very proud to say that my office has been very successful in accomplishing that big goal. And we've done that by building a team of attorneys and advocates and staff members who are trained and work well together and really believe in the mission and the vision of the values of the office. And I am very excited to continue the work that I've started. We are just getting started. We still have so much left to do. It takes a tremendous amount of creativity and dedication to take these big picture ideas and translate them into actionable goals, but we have done it and we do have data to prove it. So thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Thanks so much. Attorney Shugrue, please go ahead. Oops, hold on, we need to unmute you.
Can you hear me now? Good evening, everybody. I just want to thank everybody for being here. It's a nice community turnout. I'm glad that so many people have come on to give us an opportunity to speak. I hope at some point in time we'll have the opportunity to have debates, but I am very encouraged to have this forum so we could explain to you and tell you a little bit about ourselves. I've been a litigator, a lawyer for 36 years. I've been a prosecutor. I was a prosecutor in Springfield, where when I was first became an assistant district attorney, I was moved directly to the Superior Court, and I focused mainly on child abuse and sexual assaults for many of the years when I first started prosecuting. I handled very serious felonies in Springfield. We were part of a justice grant where in 1986, there was a whole influx of new child abuse cases and a big focus on rape of women and domestic violence. And I was at the forefront in the beginning of that. And I really enjoyed my prosecution experience. And I dealt with children on a daily basis that had needs. And we were able to, later on, I'm the founder of the Berkshire County Children's Advocacy Center. I used that tool in the community in order to bring easy and less trauma to children that are prosecuting, that we were prosecuting individuals for, their caregivers, their parents, that had been dealing with abuse, and we were able to do that. And I founded the Berkshire County Children's Advocacy Center thereafter. I've been a defense lawyer for 28 years, so I've dealt with inequalities and inequities in the system. I fought both for people of color and people who have been marginalized, people in the community. I've worked hard on that last 28 years of getting justice for individuals. I have spent so much time trying to equalize and making sure people are treated fairly within the community. So I'm here today. I'm pleased to answer your questions, and I hope to have a nice forum tonight.
Thanks so much, Attorney Shugrue. So once again, if you have questions to pose, you should send them by message to either Helen or Kumar. I will also mention that we have many thematically similar questions. So we may either bundle questions together into similar questions or ask them as follow-ups. So if you don't hear the precise wording that you sent to Helen and Kumar, to just please note that that's why we're doing that, to try to address as many as possible. So our first question, we're going to start with Attorney Shugrue. We are also going to be pasting the question text into the chat so that everybody can see it. As our friends at the ACLU reminded us, DAs are elected by voters, serve the whole county, and speak for both the Commonwealth and victims and their families in court proceedings. Who do you think of as your employer or constituency, and how do you manage the sometimes competing interests of these groups? Is there such a thing as objectivity in the DA's role?
Well, I think there's definitely objectivity in the DA's role, and I think that who we deal with are our constituents. We deal both with, we have to make sure that people are treated equally with justice throughout the criminal justice process. We have to make sure that there's fair and equal distribution of justice. At the same time, too, we do need to be aggressive on serious crimes, but also compassionate. I believe in the 3 C's: bringing confidence, bringing competence, and bringing compassion to the district attorney's office. And I think the way to do that is to involve the community. And at the same time, too, we have an obligation and a duty to victims to make sure that they are treated appropriately and that their cases are handled appropriately, so that we ease the process and the trauma of them going through the whole criminal justice system. So I think that you have to take a look, and that's why we have the scales of justice. It's a balancing act. We have to have compassion. At the same time, too, we have to also be aggressive against serious criminals, at the same time treating other individuals that may find themselves in the criminal justice system with equality and with the availability to make sure that we get people safe, and that if there's any issues, if someone has an addiction problem, I don't believe in just, or substance abuse disorder as we call it now, I don't believe we should just dismiss the case. I think that we have an obligation to take care of people that have had a substance abuse disorder and get them through that before we dismiss the case. I believe in doing what I would call smart prosecution, smart justice, which is if someone's addicted to drugs, let's take our efforts and let's get them off those drugs and help them get employed before we just dismiss the case. Because if you leave an addict out there, it's not an answer.
Thanks so much. DA Harrington, same question for you, and it's in the chat as well.
Well, I regard myself as a minister of justice, and to me, that is a very kind of big picture idea as far as, you know, our decisions should be grounded in fairness and equity. And for me, as part of those decision-making processes, we do consider a systemic inequities that exist within our society and within the criminal legal system. So, for example, you know, if we have an individual who has committed a crime, and if a criminal charge is going to impact their ability to remain in the United States, if they could potentially be deported. Those are the kinds of factors that we do take into account when we are making decisions as far as how we're going to approach a particular case. So it's a lot of different things that come together, and certainly we're a very victim-centered office. We work very hard to make sure that victims feel like they are empowered throughout the court process, which is difficult because the process is not designed to necessarily protect victims. So, but first and foremost, you know, I think it's incredibly important for prosecutors to follow the law and to follow all of the ethical guidelines that apply to prosecutors to ensure that our convictions are fair and sound and just. But I do look at how our decisions can solve problems or maybe have more negative impacts on people. So we look at the diverting people and getting people into therapeutic programs where appropriate.
Thank you very much. This round, we are going to start with DA Harrington. What are the 3 most important cases you've had in your career, and why would you designate them as such?
Wow, the 3 most important cases I've had in my career. So I'm gonna start with a case that I had very early on in my legal career. I worked in South Florida representing post-conviction, doing post-conviction death penalty appeals for individuals who were sentenced to death row. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it was excellent training for the work that I do now as the district attorney. And I had an opportunity to represent an individual who was on death row for a crime he committed when he was 17 years old. And this was, you know, these cases take decades sometimes to resolve. This case had been in process for a long time. But while I was representing him, we were able to get him a life sentence because there was a case out of the Supreme Court that said that individuals who committed crimes under the age of 18 could not be put to death. So that to me, you know, was a formative case for me. Other cases that I've worked on more recently as a district attorney, you know, I'm prosecuting 2 homicide cases. One of them is a domestic violence homicide. The other is a shooting that occurred. And I'm limited in terms of what I can talk about in terms of current cases, but I've really enjoyed being a prosecutor. I've really enjoyed working with our state police. I really enjoy working on behalf of victims, and it's been incredibly satisfying.
Attorney Shugrue, same question to you. Hold on, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. It's difficult when I have had literally over thousands and thousands of cases I've handled in 36 years as a litigator in the courtroom, what I consider my home court. I'm there all the time in court every single day. I've been that way. I've been a litigator for that long, both as a prosecutor, defense attorney. The one that stands out to me the most was probably about 6 or 7 years ago. I represented a Black man that was charged with murder. And this was in the city of Pittsfield. And it was a racially motivated case. And it was involved around some drugs. This Black individual had been surrounded by a number of white individuals who were attacking him. He drove in his car, he drove backwards, and he took a handgun that they had, which was illegal, which he was punished for. But he had that handgun, he shot out the window, and he killed the individual that was attacking him. It was a self-defense case. He was charged in the district court with murder. I was able to successfully present that defense to the grand jury, and the case was dismissed. I was so proud because I knew he hadn't committed that crime. And I was able to make sure that he was equally treated right. And I was able to present his defense in the criminal justice system, in the grand jury. And his case found out that he was not responsible for that murder, and the self-defense prevailed. So I was very proud of that. The second one I have to say was when I was a prosecutor, I prosecuted an individual that raped multiple children on a bus in Lanesboro back in 1993. And it was a horrific case. And I got that case about 30 days before trial. But I was able to use the tools that we have as prosecution and with working with the state police. I'm very close to the state police. I'm very close with all the police departments in Berkshire County. I was able to get dive teams. I was able to get helicopters to find evidence. And I was able to successfully convict that person and receive life on and after. And finally, I represent a little boy. I prosecuted a case of a little boy that had been immersion burns. And the power and the courage that child showed me is what enabled me to do the Berkshire County Children's Advocacy Center. And that power and that conviction is what I still have today.
Okay, terrific. This next question is more administrative in nature. As the district attorney, you are the manager of the office. What have you done, or how do you plan to attract and retain high-quality attorney, advocate, and other office staff talent to the Berkshires, and develop and retain great staff in the office? And the start of this question goes to—
Is this to me? Yeah, okay, thank you. So I worked in 2 district attorney's office. I worked in Springfield. I worked in obviously in Berkshire County. And I worked in the upper echelons of those 2 particular offices. I worked in the Superior Court each time. I saw how those offices were, how they operated, how they worked. I am confident that my past history, that my conviction rate, and my respect as a defense attorney will attract people. I am going to go out and make sure that we have an equal office. I am going to go out and I'm going to advocate for and try to get people of color in my office that are prosecutors. And I formerly taught for the National College of District Attorneys Association. I want to make sure that that staff gets trained with the National College of District Attorneys Association, because when you come out of law school, you're taught law, but you're not taught forensic evidence. You're not taught ballistics. You're not taught DNA. You're not taught all the things that are necessary to have that. So if you train and you let people know you're going to train them, you will attract those type of people. I want to make sure we have a diversified office that matches what the community is. I am going to take every step I possibly can to make sure that we have a diversified office. So there are many, many things that we can do with that, which is to attract people of color as lawyers, to bring them here, that they know this is a safe community. This is a beautiful community to grow up. We still live in such a wonderful place. That alone attracts people up here. I have a good relationship with the Northampton DA's office. I have a good relationship with the Springfield DA's office. I also used to work with the district attorney early in Worcester. I anticipate, and my daughter's a prosecutor in Salem for John Blodgett. So we have I have a number of connections with other DA's offices throughout the state. I can tell you already, but I've been approached by many people who have wanted to join, if I get elected, to join this office because they like my vision, they like my enthusiasm, they like my energy and what I bring to this community.
may have just lost DA Harrington from.
I'm here, Meg.
Oh, we lost her from Spotlight. Okay, sorry about that. DA Harrington, that question is to you. What have you done or what do you plan to do going forward?
Yeah, so talking about having an office that the community critical for a law enforcement office. And we have been able to attract and hire a team in the district attorney's office. I've been able to hire.
Hold on, Harrington, we're having some challenge. You're getting a lot of distortion and it's not easily possible to understand what you're saying. So did we lose her? You may try turning off your camera. That might give you a little bit more bandwidth in this moment while you're talking.
Yeah. I'll answer this question and then maybe I'll try switching to my phone. I have to work. I'm in campaign headquarters and we lost power as for some reason. I don't know why. So I am going to try switching to my cell phone in a minute. But back to the question. So I think the key to attracting diverse talent and retaining diverse talent is building an office with a mission and vision and values that people believe in and building a team that people want to be a part of. Obviously, the work that we do is very stressful.
Okay. I think we're going to give her one moment to switch to an audio channel so we can get her back. I wish I'd prepared a short.
Can you hear me, Meg?
Yes, we can hear you now. Okay.
Oh, the power just came on, so maybe that's a good sign.
You still have 60 seconds on your answer if you want to take that 60 seconds.
Yeah, so like the work we do results in vicarious trauma. And so we work to have a supportive work environment. We do not judge performance by conviction rates. We judge performance by doing justice. So
I'm going to go ahead and say, Andrea, you got to switch to your phone. We're going to give just a second for that to happen. This is a great opportunity.
Yeah, I'm going to switch to my.
Perfect.
I'm going to switch to my cell phone.
Yep.
But I might need somebody to text me. Give me a Zoom link.
Give us just 1 second to do that on the back end. If you're enjoying this programming, remember that the monthly NAACP General Membership Meeting happens on the first Wednesday of each month. And the branch would surely love to have you as a member and at the meetings. DA Harrington, has somebody sent you that link?
I just sent it to her.
Okay, I'm here.
Terrific. Much better. Okay. You have the starting off for the next question. We have recently seen studies from the Boston Globe and other researchers about racial disparities in jury pools, that jury pools in Massachusetts are disproportionately white, as well as the fact that the type and frequency of plea bargains being offered to defendants differs by race. What are your plans for how to create policies, train your ADAs, and assess efforts to eliminate disparities in these areas? And that is DA Harrington's start.
I believe that these are two different questions. I mean, I'm going to take the first question in regards to jury pools. In Berkshire County, you know, if you use a challenge against a BIPOC juror, we have worked to address that issue in our district court trials. We make.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on one second. You were on mute for about 5 seconds there. The last thing I heard was district court trials.
Yeah, district court trials, we have a general policy that we use causes for challenges for cause. We do not generally use peremptory challenges in district court trials. You know, you don't get enough of an opportunity to communicate or talk with the jurors to get any kind of sense of what kind of juror they're going to be beyond making, you know, really basic assumptions based on, you know, very superficial views of the jurors. In Superior Court, we do use peremptory challenges. We just did a great training on this with the Middlesex DA's office to ensure that all of the prosecutors are properly trained in how to use peremptory challenges so that we can ensure that we are not being discriminatory in how we use those. The other question about plea bargaining is very important because there was a study done by Harvard that showed that people of color spend more time incarcerated than white people, even when you control for the types of crimes, their criminal histories. It was very clearly discriminatory. And 95% of those cases are resolved by plea. So we partner with the Wilson Center at Duke University to do a massive data study on our plea bargaining. So we, for an entire year, we filled out very detailed surveys about our pleas and the process and our decision-making process. It is the first study of its kind. It's groundbreaking. It's going to inform criminal justice policy.
I just want to stress that I think we ran into time, and so cut that question off. Attorney Shugrue, this is your question now.
Well, thank you. There are a couple issues. Let's start with the jury selection first. First up, one of the things we have to do is we got to educate the public that we need more jurors, people of color. And unfortunately, we're not getting that much in Berkshire County. When we do have them, I think there is a system that could be put into place. Is if we're picking a jury, just so people who don't know, who are not lawyers, how it works is the panel comes on in. And we get numbers. It could be, if it's Superior Court, 1 to 70, or it could be 1 to 26 in the district court. I think if we see that we've got people of color that are dispersed throughout that, then perhaps we can move them higher up into the pool so that they have a chance to actually sit on a jury, and so that's more conducive to what our community is. In other words, so that we get an equal amount of people of color on the jury as it is in the community, because we're supposed to be judged by the jury of our peers. So I think that's important. The other thing that I think is important is what we should do more more lawyer directed voir dires. What a voir dire is, and we didn't have this in the Commonwealth before, we ask questions to the jurors. So we can ask questions about racial bias and those kind of issues. So I think those three things alone could potentially try to alleviate some of the concerns that we have, but it still is an issue, and we have to keep a focal point on that, that we know we have that issue. So that's regarding to juries. Regarding to police, I think we should have a uniform system with police. In the Superior Court, so most of you may not know this, and I've been in the system for 36 years, so I'm in this on a day-to-day basis. I know what it's like. We have sentencing guidelines in the Superior Court. They're not etched in stone, but they're guidelines. And those guidelines should be treated equally between any particular individual. I don't care, the person of color or what your issue is, gender, whatever. We should treat those the same, just as Lady Justice says, balancing act and blind justice.
Thank you, Attorney Shugrue. Our next question is something that was an issue that came up in the sheriff's forum as well. And that was the question of collaboration between that office and now your office with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Would DA's office headed by you notify ICE if you had an undocumented person who might be criminally charged if you were aware that the person had an administrative warrant issued by ICE?
Now, that's a great question, but let me focus back a little bit about what all the criminal justice system should be about. Every case is like it's your own DNA. Every case is individually specific. We should treat every case individually specific. Because we live in Berkshire County and we're not in a huge metropolis like Boston, we can treat these cases individually. We look at them individually. So it depends on the severity of the particular crime. If someone's charged with a minor drug offense and ICE wants to come and take them, then I don't think it's appropriate for us to do that. However, if it's a case that it's a very serious violent felon, then and a conviction gets happened, I think we have an obligation at that point in time to assist, and not just assist, but notify them. That's all. We're not going to assist them, but notify them. But that's, again, you got to take a look at every single case. We should not be doing blanket policies. We should not be doing that this is what we're going to do all across the board. Every case should be looked at individually. Every person is different. Every fact pattern is different. I've been doing this 36 years. I don't think I've seen one fact pattern that's exactly the same. So because of that, I think it's very important and incumbent upon us to make sure that we look and treat those cases individually. And I think it's important that we don't want to deport somebody that had a possession of heroin because they fell into an addiction or substance abuse disorder problem. We don't want to do that. But and also at the same time too, there's also different type of sentences that can be incorporated that don't result in deportation. So it's an important question, but you have to look at it specifically, because if it's a major drug dealer that's coming in here and armed with weapons and we get a conviction on that, then we need to make sure that all agencies are just properly notified.
DA Harrington, your turn at this question.
Hi, so it's very important. I think one of our most critical goals is to build trust with the community. And the immigrant community is a community that is particularly distrustful of law enforcement, and it limits our ability to be able to investigate cases that vulnerable population is less likely to report if they've been victims of crime. So my message to the immigrant community and to the community at large is very clearly, unequivocally, my office does not cooperate with ICE. We do not notify ICE of anything about our cases at all, ever. That is our policy. It is a very firm policy. All of our prosecutors know what the policy is. It's important when we have a criminal prosecution of a serious case that we be permitted to follow that prosecution through to its conclusion. If ICE finds out about it, they could potentially deport that individual prior to our being able to conclude our case. And it is not the role, nor is it necessary for the district attorney's office to be communicating with ICE. That is a very firm policy that we have in the office.
Thank you, DA Harrington. At this point, we're going to pivot to a series of questions related to drugs and substance use. Sorry, there's a plane. We're in the landing path of Pittsfield Airport, so I'm going to just let that happen. So we're going to have a series of questions about drugs and substance use. Since the last DA election, the role of legalized marijuana in Berkshire County has expanded a great deal. What, if any, challenges or issues does this pose to the DA's office?
Would you like me to take that first?
Yes, that's DA Harrington's first.
Okay. I think the biggest challenge with the legalization of marijuana is the fact that the 2018 Criminal Justice Reform Act did not provide a clearer path for people to have their records sealed and expunged. It is such a difficult and onerous process that we've had very few people since I've been the DA even try to take advantage of it. We did do a training. We've been trying to help people take advantage of that. We refer people to community legal aid, but it's people who have convictions for crimes in particular that for things that are now legal should not be suffering with having them on their criminal record. I would also like to point out that in terms of our drug policy, my office does not prosecute people for possession of personal use amounts of drugs. And I think that that is critical to destigmatizing substance use disorder. I meet with the families of victims who have died from a fatal overdose. And the number one thing that they say to me is that their loved one did not obtain help or treatment because of the shame and the stigma that they felt. And I'm very proud of the fact that my office does not criminalize drug possession or drug use. And I think that that makes a very strong statement throughout the community and throughout the community of people who use drugs, that they are valued and that, you know, substance use is a medical issue. It is not a criminal issue.
Thank you, DA Harrington. Attorney Shugrue? You're on mute.
Thank you. Let me, I'm going to focus on what the question is, which is the legalization of marijuana in Berkshire County and how that has expanded the challenges in the district attorney's office. Well, one of the challenges we have is that, as you see every corner now, there's a dispensary. But what we don't have is we still have issues with driving while impaired and driving while intoxicated while using a substance, and it could be marijuana. We have to really type of work and focus on that. It could be a big problem. And I think we're seeing it become a big problem, because marijuana use has increased significantly. We want to make sure that people aren't driving on the roads impaired and under the influence of marijuana. So as it relates to that, additionally, I think that we also should have a conviction integrity unit. Let's look back at all these past marijuana convictions about whether or not those should be at some point expunged and deal with the legislation dealing with those issues, because it's not fair for someone. Particularly, we fought this for years. People that were possession of marijuana and stole the joint and went to jail for 2 years in the House of Correction. They were kids, and we fought to get rid of that. And again, being in the system for this long, I know what it's like, and I saw how difficult it was and how awful it was that we were putting 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old children in jail for possession of marijuana and selling it, a joint, to someone within a school zone. So, the legalization has changed that, and obviously there's no prosecution for that. There still is an underground effort to sell marijuana out there, which is, again, not legal because it's not an approved situation. So I think we can't just ignore that. So there are a myriad of problems with the legalization of marijuana, and we're just caught up to it. This has come really quick, and we have a lot of work to do for it.
Thank you. The next question in this segment is, how has the prosecution of drug-related cases, whether possession, distribution, sale, or, the person had written prediction, but I think it's production, reduced drug use or drug addiction over the last 50 years? How has the prosecution of drug-related cases of various kinds reduced drug use or drug addiction over the last 50 years? And that goes to Attorney Shugrue first. Well,
it's difficult to say how it's changed over 50 years because the drugs have changed even in the last 20 years. We were dealing with an opiate addiction earlier. It was prescribed opiates are out there everywhere. It was just it was different than it is now with heroin and fentanyl. So it's changed. And years ago, we dealt with, again, convictions for people for marijuana that went to jail, and some people for prison. So it has changed a lot of ways. I can remember when I first started doing this, and as it morphed into times, we were treating these cases so significantly. The minimum mandatories were outrageous. The Criminal Justice Reform Act of 2018 got rid of all those type of minimum mandatories and enabled judges and prosecutors and even defense attorneys to work together to make sure that we had appropriate sentencing for individuals and not just stuck by minimum mandatory sentences that had existed. So there's been a complete change in the spectrum. And I've done doing this 36 years, not 50, but I've done 36 years. And I've seen a change first on the types of drugs that we use and what's happened. And again, I don't know if we'll ever get rid of the greed that exists with people selling drugs. That's why drug dealers come in here, because they make a lot of money and they pounce on individual people. They give drugs away free. They get them hooked on drugs. And so we deal with that. I also think we've recognized, certainly more recently, the need to help people out and get people through the process, because an addict won't get help unless we help them get there. Because if you leave an addict out there, the draw to heroin is so incredibly demanding and controlling of a person's body that they won't get that help. So I want to make sure that we make sure they get that type of help and use that to the district attorney's office by giving that through pretrial diversion through a Chapter 276, Section 87.
Thank you. DA Harrington.
Well, Berkshire County had a reputation for being very aggressive in terms of prosecuting drug cases. And with that, now we have a 6% of our community struggles with opioid addiction. We have seen our overdose rates going up continuously from year to year. So I don't believe that the prosecution of drug crimes has had a positive impact on the actual health and well-being of our community and the people who use drugs. I do think that drug prosecution is beneficial to public safety in terms of addressing people who are committing violence in our community, addressing these quality of life issues for people who live in neighborhoods where there's houses where drug dealing is going on. We have to have a certain amount of law and order to address those issues. But the way that Berkshire County is really going to address the problem that we have with people who are struggling with drug use is by addressing the demand for drugs. That's through harm reduction. Harm reduction is evidence-based. It works. I have an opportunity to study it in Portugal. We've been working across the community to build a harm reduction infrastructure that is more of a medically based therapeutic approach than a punitive criminal justice reform approach. And I'm hopeful that I'll have more opportunity with other questions to speak more about that.
Thank you very much. Both of you spoke to this in that last response, so this is a good time for this question. You both tout the benefits of diversion programs, but many of these programs have participation costs borne by the defendants themselves. What should happen when people cannot afford the cost to attend or participate in these programs? And that goes first to DA Harrington.
Yeah, thank you. I think, my office, we have a number of different approaches to diverting cases. So, cases that are, very low level cases where we feel more harm than good, it happens in the criminal legal system. We dismiss those cases outright. So like possession of drugs, for example, trespassing, sometimes, resisting arrest, like a lot of driver's license offenses. We keep them out of the system entirely. And there's studies that show that people are less likely to come back and to recidivate if low-level crimes are dismissed outright. For people that require more supervision, that are presenting more of a risk, we use the statute 27687, which is a diversionary statute that's in the code. We have increased the use of that statute significantly. We used it 131 times in 2021. It's more than it's ever been used before. It's a policy in my office. We do not ask for fines and fees. We recognize that for people that are indigent and people that are stuck in the legal system, fines and fees just pushes people further and further into poverty and is not helpful or beneficial. We have been utilizing the Community Justice Center to provide our diversion services, which limits cost to the participants. We've created a roster of community-based organizations. I've applied for grant funding to try to help pay for those programs. Thank you.
Timothy Shugrue.
Please, as I began to speak earlier about, is that I believe in the diversion process. I believe that, and we have the system in place. 276 Section 87, District Attorney Harrington is talking about the fact that they've used it a few times. That's about 1% of the cases. That should be used much more frequently. We're talking about the fact is that we have systems in place through the probation department that doesn't cost individuals monies. And if there's people that can't afford it, court can waive those fees for anything that we do have to put them in. Those programs are available for the Breeding Center. I work closely with them. We have excellent drug counselors over there. People are working. Candace Decimo is one of the people I know. She has worked wonderfully with getting people off drugs. I have gotten my people off drugs in the 28 years I've been doing defense work. I've been able to get them clean, but you can't just dismiss them. You can't kick the can down the road. If we do that, this leads to 65 overdoses in 2021, 59 overdoses in 2020. So that's a real problem. I think we need to address it now. How we address it now is we help people get off drugs. A 276 Section 87 is a diversion. It doesn't result in a conviction, but you give people the services paid for by our county, paid for by our citizens, so that people can have that services, get off the drugs, become employed, and at that point, become a productive member of society. That's how you break the cycle. You don't just leave these addicts out there all by themselves. You leave an addict out there all by themselves, they are not going to find the system. As I said earlier, the urge is too high. People won't get the help. We need to give them that help. The only way to end this crisis is to get people off drugs.
Thank you so much. Kamar is asking us, you are both doing such a beautiful job of sticking to the time guidelines. The orange is actually a 30-second reminder. So you both have a little bit more time.
That was red.
Doing really excellent work. And the red even is actually a 5-second reminder. So just to say, thank you. And you have a little bit more time, each of you, than you think that you do.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've lost my place in the question document here. So that actually is a nice segue into another question, which is, what is your plan for collaboration with other agencies to combat mental health issues that play a large role in recidivism and the inability to live stably in the community? The issues we see today, this person says, are not going to be solved just by the DA's office. So what is your plan for collaboration with other community agencies? And that goes first to Attorney Shugrue.
Well, thank you. That's a great question. And you know, when I started the Kids Place in 1991, it took me about 4 years to get that established. What we started with was the idea of collaboration. So what we had to do is we had to get everybody to sign on. I had the District Attorney's Office sign on. I had DCF sign on. I had Berkshire Mental Health sign on. I had a pediatrician sign on. And obviously we had therapy available. So all these 5 agencies signed on. That was collaboration. And it was really difficult to do at first, but once people signed that contract, and then everybody stuck to it. And we have collaborated for now 27 years, working to prevent child abuse and to ease the trauma for children. That can be true with mental health as well. Again, in the 28 years in private practice, I've dealt with mental health issues on a repetitive basis, and it's very difficult. We don't have a lot of services here in Berkshire County for mental health. There's no question that there's a need there. I've also spoken to and talked to people from Hamden County. They have a mental health court. I think we ought to have a mental health court like we have a drug court, so that we treat the mental health people that have these issues appropriately. One of the things that we find out, at least I found out in the 28 years when I've been doing defense work, one of the things I found out is oftentimes it's just a matter of getting the person to a right physician to get properly medicated, because sometimes the medications don't match with what the mental health aspect is, and to help them. But we have to cooperate with that. And I'm a big person about cooperation. That's why I talk about cooperating with the police departments, cooperating with the sheriff's department, cooperating now with mental health, and also with the Brain Center, because we have to work together to bring this to the forefront first. I also think it's very important that we start talking more about it. Like I said, when I started the Kids Place, first thing we did was talk about it and address it and say, this is a problem. We have such limited resources. The people that do it in Berkshire County are wonderful, but there are limited resources. The more we talk about it, bring attention to it, and attract the issue so that we tackle it, the better off we'll be. And I think having a mental health court would help as well.
Thank you. DA Harrington.
Addressing the mental health needs of people here in Berkshire County is one of the most pressing issues that our community faces, and particularly addressing the mental health needs of young people here in Berkshire County. We know that the rates of depression are increasing for young people in particularly, and across the community overall. We can see that the number of suicides are increasing here in Berkshire County. So this is absolutely critical. A mental health court would definitely be appropriate here in Berkshire County, and that's something that is very much needed. And it's difficult to bring these kinds of programs to a small rural community. So it definitely will take some ingenuity and creativity. We have a youth advisory board that has been focusing on youth mental health and has been learning to be peer mentors and to provide training and guidance in destigmatizing mental health issues in the high schools across Berkshire County. We have collaborated with a number of local providers to ensure that the victims of crime that we serve are being referred to appropriate mental health treatment. We are talking with the Department of Probation, who wants to launch a pilot program here in Berkshire County to sign people up for mass health when they come into the court system. Their initial thinking was that it was going to be for defendants, but we've also talked to them about also providing that to victims. I think getting people just proper medical care is key. We really do rely on defense attorneys, and Mr. Shugrue is an excellent one at providing plans for their clients. Clients with private attorneys tend to have more options in terms of seeking mental health care. My office encourages that. We consider that when we're disposing of cases if people have addressed their mental health needs. I see I'm out of time. Thank you.
We have a lot of questions about the use of dangerousness hearings, so I'm going to pivot to that at this point. At the very end of the legislative session, Governor Baker attempted to attach an expansion of the use of dangerousness hearings, sometimes called 58As, which permits defendants to be held pretrial without access to bail, to a budget bill related to no-cost calls from county jails. Jane Doe Inc., the Massachusetts Sexual and Domestic Violence Coalition, said on Sunday, quote, "We cannot support language that will indiscriminately permit indefinite pretrial detention without sufficient evidence to demonstrate the likelihood of further harm. It is irresponsible to roll back any progress Massachusetts has made on dismantling systemic racism in our criminal legal system." When you contemplate the DA's office's use of dangerousness hearings, what does that mean, and what do you understand to be the appropriate use of this tool? So what do you understand to be the appropriate use of dangerous? And that goes first to DA Harrington.
Well, in my office, one of the first changes that I made was that we got away from using bail as a means to hold people pretrial without a fair process, which is provided by 58A, the dangerousness statute. It really was the practice that people were being held pretrial because they couldn't afford to make bail. And the statistics from the presentation about Black people being charged 5 times higher median bail, those were from 2011. Those were from Mass Inc. Those would not be the statistics today because it is very unusual for my office to request bail. We request bail in instances where people are genuine flight risks. We do use dangerousness in order to hold people pretrial who the courts, find to be dangerous. It's limited to people who have committed violent crimes. I do think that it's an important tool for public safety. I think that in order for people to support criminal justice reform, they need to be safe. They need to feel safe. Most of the cases we use it in are domestic violence cases. I do recognize that there needs to be a lot of scrutiny around the use of dangerousness hearings, but people are provided due process. They have counsel. We have to meet a pretty stringent standard in order to convince a judge to hold people pretrial. In terms of the governor's proposal, in my experience, there are some instances where I would like to be able to use 58A where we're not able to use it. Like, for example, a statutory rape case. Dangerousness is not available for those kinds of cases. Which I do think presents a public safety risk. And also the fact that we get one opportunity to request that a court holds somebody pretrial, and that's like at the very first appearance. So I think that it's a rush process, and I would like to have a little bit more time. So I would like a change to the statute in that regard.
Thank you. Attorney Shugrue. You're on mute.
I'm glad you brought the subject up because it's one I really wanted to address as well. I know my opponent has signed on and she has supported this controversial bill. I do not support this bill. I can tell you why, because it is full of racial inequities. And quite frankly, I think the ACLU has indicated that it's full of racial inequities because what it does is now it's taking away, just so the public knows, when someone's held on dangerousness hearing, if it's in the district court, it's for 120 days. In the superior court, it's 180 days. You get held without any right to bail. You can't post anything. It's a punishment aspect in some aspects. So I have a real problem with the misuse of the dangerousness statute. I do agree that we could include more offenses that were that are sexual assaults, child abuse cases, those kind of things. But to say that now we're going to talk about a person's past criminal history and implement that with dangerousness, because currently you can only talk about the offense itself. Is that offense dangerous? If it is, then that person should potentially be held on dangerousness. But it's being misused. Instead of bail, which was, it could be appropriate in some circumstances, certainly not misdemeanors, but to assure appearances coming to court, that's one thing. But what's happening here is racial inequality in this bill, and it's been recognized as that. And in fact, it's been withdrawn and it's sent back to study because of the racial inequities that exist and Governor Baker's bill. I do not support that one bit, because all I see is, again, a problem of locking up minorities based upon past criminal history, not upon the offense that currently exists. I also know that it's being misused here. Instead of doing alternative, because I've been a defense lawyer, I'm dealing with this. I see that used to hold people for 120 days, 180 days, which is not appropriate in any circumstances under those conditions. So I think that it's being misused instead of bail. I think that's what happened. We're like, well, we're not going to use bail. But instead, what we're going to do is going to hold people without right to bail. And that's a dangerous situation. I had a person that under 58B, not under 58A, which is the same statute, that was held on an OUI, a young girl. Family hired me after she was held for 120 days. And that was a 23-year-old girl on an OUI by a road cop, and I beat those cases.
I'm going to return to the second part of a question that got a lot of focus about jury composition. And there was some research presented about the racial disparity about plea deals. Do you believe that plea deals are fair to defendants, victims, and the community? That question goes first to Attorney Shugrue.
Well, it depends on how you use it. It can be used appropriately. Again, like in the Superior Court, we have sentencing recommendations. And the idea of having sentencing recommendations, the judge is not bound by them, and nor is it either side when they're presenting their case. Because every case, again, is individually specific, and you have to present stuff that shows what's different about this case than the guidelines. But it's a framework, so we know where we're starting from. So I think it's important to use those guidelines in the Superior Court and then be able to talk about the individual facts of that case in the individual system that exists. So, the plea deals, unfortunately, they are a nature of the beast, because sometimes you have to do plea deals because the facts of the case may be that you lost witnesses. It may be that's more of a difficult case to do. But we shouldn't be using it just to get people to plead guilty. It should be used to adjust the appropriate sentence for the appropriate crime. That's the real idea of plea deals, because when we have minimum mandatories and everybody's treated the same, it may not be the same. This person may have gotten themselves, gone through treatment, for example. For his mental health, gone through mental health treatment, got adjusted on the medications. Lots of side factors. We have to look in their past histories. So there's a lot of input that goes into that. So doing a plea deal, you've got to take into consideration the entire facts of that particular case and make sure that the crime fits the punishment. And that's the whole idea of doing plea deals. Sometimes we see cases that are charged or overcharged, and so a plea deal could make it appropriate of what the sentence should be for the actual facts that occurred in that case. So they are an important component of our system, because oftentimes the charge comes in, and then when you start getting all the facts from both sides and they all get there, we get to the truth. And when we get to the truth, sometimes those charges must be reduced and the appropriate sentence must be sanctioned out to the individual. So it's very individual specific. And I think, again, living in Berkshire County, we have the availability to handle those cases that way.
DA Harrington. You're still on mute.
Well, my understanding is that the rules were that we were supposed to, talk about our own positions and not be, talking about each other. That was not adhered to. On the dangerousness question, I would like to go back and respond to what was said.
I'm going to go ahead and move us forward. We have a lot of questions, and I want to move forward with the plea deals question.
Well, I'm happy to answer the plea deals question, but I 100% did not agree with the dangerousness bill being sent to study. It needs to be acted upon. I did not say that I agreed to look at.
I'm going to object. If we're going to not follow the rules, I'm not going to.
Okay. Well, we're going to mute both of you. We'll call this whole thing right now. Go ahead, DA Harrington.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Now I'm on mute. Do you believe that plea deals are fair to defendants, victims, and the community?
Well, I think that it depends on what you mean by plea deals. You know, the problem that we have with minimum mandatory sentences for crimes is that it increases huge risks to defendants to take their cases to trial, which is it's a terrible flaw in our criminal legal system, and it really leads to inequitable outcomes, and it leads to much higher rates of incarceration than are fair or that are appropriate. Here, we do have statutes that we work with that have minimum mandatory sentences, and sometimes those are the statutes that are, the statutes that are appropriate to the facts and that must be charged. We have a policy in the district attorney's office that we do not have a trial penalty. There is not, one deal that you can take, and if you don't take it, then you're going to pay a huge cost after trial. We really do our best to work within the statutes that we have on the books to ensure that we are treating people fairly so that they are not facing these massive risks to taking their cases to trial. I mean, the cases that do go to trial, they tend to be the cases that are the harder cases for us to make. And we have a much bigger focus in my office.
Okay, we're out of time on that one. On July 29th, Bloomberg News published a report, and I'll put the link in, that details there is a mismatch between media coverage of crime and the actual crime rate. That is, there is more and more intense media coverage, even though crime rates are falling. Indeed, Pittsfield's 5-year crime rate is down 48% and is down 2% from last year. What is the role of the DA's office in educating the community both about what is actually occurring in the community as well as about research-based violence prevention strategies? This goes first to DA Harrington.
Well, getting accurate information about crime rates is difficult from the perspective of the DA's office. My office has had a commitment to collecting data and sharing data and transparency to share the data that we have within our control. I can tell you that the lead charges in Central Berkshire District Court have been going down. They've gone down from 2018 to 2021 from about 4,500 to around 3,700. Property crimes have been going down since 2015. I think it's really critical for the district attorney and for the district attorney's office to provide clear and accurate information about what it is that we're doing to the public and not to fear monger or to stoke up fear and passion in people so that they're, overly afraid. But I do recognize that, people see what's happening on the national news and they feel like that's what's happening in their community, and people need to feel safe in their own communities. And we do that by talking about real data, talking about what's really happening here and having community conversations. I think one of the most important pieces of the work in the district attorney's office is building those community connections, building that trust with the community, going and showing up in all of the neighborhoods at all times, not even just when something bad happens. And we've certainly assembled our data, we've shared our data, and we work to educate the community about what's really happening in criminal justice. But we need partners in that work. We need local media to be our partners. I mean, groups like the League of Women Voters and the NAACP and the ACLU are critical. I've been here many times to talk to you about the work that we're doing. And that's a critical role of a prosecutor.
Attorney Shugrue.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Obviously, there's a great disparity between what the media reports and what's actually happening, especially on the national level. But it's important that in the district attorney's office that we share the information, that you are transparent, so you can tell the community what is going on and what's happening. And that can be limited to the role sometimes, because you have to also, when an investigation is ongoing, you can't share that information because people are put at risk and whatnot. But there's clearly what's happening in the media is not reflective of what's happening in court. And some of the things that we see is people think they see things on TV, even on shows, they think that's what happens in real life, and it doesn't. So we need to make sure we educate people what the criminal justice system is all about. And just because the charges are down doesn't mean crime's down. I want to make that clear. Just because cases are being dismissed and cases aren't being prosecuted doesn't mean the crime is down. So that's sort of a misnomer about what's really happening. We have to really look at what is being reported as crimes and be able to go back and figure out what is going on in our community and where do we need our focus on that. Property crimes may be going down, but we're also not prosecuting the thefts and things along those lines. So we got to look at, is crime really going down? I don't think it is. I don't think our community is any safer now than any time before. So I think that we do have to make sure that we focus on what reality is versus what the perception is, and that comes from getting the information from the source himself, because that's from the police and from the courts about what is being charged, what is being dropped, and how many arrests are being made by the police officers and what's happening from there. So I think it's important that we continue to focus on that. I tell you right now, we'll be transparent. I'm reachable all the time. Anybody who's been in this campaign has known so far, they've had no difficulty getting in touch with me. I respond to everybody on Messenger, I respond to everything on every particular venue. So I feel pretty confident that we have to, be able to be transparent. But at the same time, too, that we also have a responsibility to victims of crime and make sure the victims of crime are being heard and make sure the victims of crime are being made whole. Thank you.
Thank you. That's actually a nice segue in there. So I posted a link that's from Pittsfield's crime data. And Pittsfield, as far as I can tell, is actually the only police department in the county that posts their crime data publicly regularly. So what is the role of civilian oversight of law enforcement, including by the DA's office? How can that be implemented here in Berkshire County? That goes first to Attorney Shugrue.
Thank you. I think it's always important to have civil oversight and just about everything that we do. We want making sure that we're all we get the community involved. I talk about that. I want the community to be involved. I want the community to be involved in my office. I want the community to be involved in our throughout the police departments, everything else. So we have, again, we talk about transparency, but I also want to make sure that we have the community involvement, and there's nothing wrong with oversights, but people are watching and doing, because listen, we all can use extra help. We can all use constructive criticism. I've got a thick skin. If people tell me that there's some way that you don't think we're doing it right, then I'm going to listen. I've listened to all sorts of platforms and things in my 36 years of doing criminal defense work and criminal prosecution. I think it's important that we do have our community involved with the district attorney's office and with oversight, and also trying to assist the community in understanding the process, understanding what takes place in the DA's office, what takes place when the police make an arrest, what takes place in the course of an investigation. So an oversight can never be a bad thing, because especially if we have diverse background with the community, so everybody is working together. The whole idea is cooperation. I keep coming back to that. We as a community have to cooperate in order to tackle the crime problem in the Berkshires and anywhere, and we have to tackle the other problems that we exist, which is substance abuse disorder, mental health issues. So all those need to be community-based. The more that we get all of us working together, like they say, it takes a village, and that's what we need to do. It takes a county to do the things that I have for a vision coming up in the next 4 years of doing things that make our community as safe and also as diversified, and also with the support of the entire community. So we all hear what everybody has to say, and we have an oversight of that. So I think it's a wonderful thing, and I have no problem with that.
Thank you. DA Harrington. You're still on mute.
The civilian oversight models that I've seen enacted in other district attorney's office generally have to do with a model of reviewing of officer-involved shootings and also post-conviction integrity review cases. I think that those, Suffolk DA's office has a really interesting model for reviewing officer-involved shootings, and I think that that is a great way of building trust and transparency with the community, because there's a lot of anxiety when an officer commits a shooting and there's a death or a serious injury from that. Because there's concern about the close relationship of the nature between the district attorney's office and local law enforcement. In my office, we have a state police detective unit that handles those investigations, but I'm very interested in implementing that kind of model. The other piece is around looking at post-conviction conviction integrity review cases. And for us in Berkshire County, we've had a position posted for that for quite some time, finding people with the kind of expertise to do that. But I would love an opportunity to, if we have people here in our community who have particular expertise in that area, to be part of that process. Meg, do you think that you could have somebody email me a Zoom link? Because I think I have to switch to my computer because my phone is going to be running out of power.
Yes, we will do that right now.
Thank you.
This is, I just want to confirm who is sending that Zoom link.
I can do it.
Thank you. This is going to be the last question. And then we will have time for 2-minute closing statements and then a little bit of information about various deadlines. I'm just going to give her 1 second to get back on here. And we can talk about how excited we are that early voting and vote by mail was expanded during this legislative session. Do we have the DA back? There she is. Okay, we just need to get her back on the spotlight for folks. Okay. So this is the final question. It goes first to DA Harrington. There is significant research about bias and inequities that exist in the justice system. What inequities are you concerned about, and how do you use or plan to use Berkshire County data to address bias and inequities in the justice system here?
Well, the study that was commissioned by Justice Gans from Harvard, clearly demonstrates that people of color spend more time incarcerated than white people for the same crimes. To me, this is very concerning. And this is something that we have to address with urgency. In my office, we have worked to address this in a number of different ways. We have hired Kristen Henning, who is a national expert in DEI training for law enforcement, who did a training with my office and with the Committee for Public Counsel Services on how trauma impacts BIPOC people and the studies that when people see police violence on the news, it impacts, there's a vicarious trauma. And so we learned how to read police reports with the knowledge that this trauma exists for BIPOC people. We read police reports looking for potentially coded language, and we consider systems of racism when we're making decisions about our cases. That's fundamental to what we do. We've done training and we've done work around that. We had retired Hampton Superior Court Judge Tina Page work with our racial justice policy group. We've created a process for prosecutors to talk about our cases and to talk about concerns when we see racial inequities. When we see problematic traffic stops, we take those problems to our local police departments and we have conversations with them, and we explain to them like why we're making decisions on our cases that we're making. And if we believe that cases are racially motivated, we dismiss those cases and we work with our local police departments to talk about that. I think that as prosecutors, we need to own what we do, but we also need to work within the system.
You've had 4 years to do it.
Attorney Sullivan, that is your first warning. The next time you're off mute, then you're going to remove you from the session. Attorney Shugrue.
Yes, thank you. In 28 years I've been doing criminal defense work, I have seen so much bias, inequities. It is incredible. And it's Berkshire County and in Springfield, even when I was a prosecutor. And, it's not just people of color, it's the LGBTQ plus community as well. It's the Latinx community. I see it all the time. It's just because people may be different. There's inequities, there's biases against them, and we have to recognize that. I've fought that for 28 years, and I'm going to continue to fight that in the future as your district attorney, because I'm seeing it all the time, and it exists here. People don't want to believe it, but it exists here, and we've got to make sure that we treat everybody equally. That's why my campaign has been Justice for All, because we have to treat people equally, and I'm going to be happy to address those biases and inequities within the system. One of the things to do is to train your staff, even within the community, and also to train your staff and to look for the biases and the inequities that exist in the system. We all don't see it, and so we've got to make sure that, and that's why I like the oversights as well, because sometimes we don't realize it and we don't see it. So we need to address that and bring it to the forefront and make sure that we do have equal justice. I think it's very, very important. Doing this my entire life, 36 years as a prosecutor and as a defense lawyer, I see it, and I've saw it the last 20 years of and I fought for people of color and people that have, just because they may be in the LGBTQ community or people in the Latinx community, how poorly they can be treated. So we have an obligation in the district attorney's office to make sure that doesn't happen to individuals, because when you take an oath to be the district attorney or an assistant district attorney, it's to do justice. It's not to get convictions. It's not just to prosecute cases. It's to make sure that everybody is treated equally. And I will make sure everybody's treated equally within the system to the best of my ability. And I will make sure that we train our ADAs to recognize that. I'll also make sure we train our staff to recognize that. And I'll make sure we have a diversified office so that we are reflective of our community, reflective of our population.
Thank you. Each candidate will now have time for a 2-minute closing statement, and the start goes to you, Attorney Shugrue.
Thank you. Again, I entered this race because I've been involved in the criminal justice system for a long time, both as a prosecutor and defense lawyer. And I've entered this race because I know I have a lot to offer. I know I can do programs. I'm not just a talker. I walk the walk. I talk the talk. I'm not just saying I'm going to do things. When people told me about doing the Berkshire County Children's Advocacy Center back in the 90s, they told me you'd never get it done. We got it done, and it's been successful 27 years. When I talk about I want to address substance abuse disorders, I can do that. Talk about that I want to address the issue of mental health, I can do that. I'm already talking about doing that by cooperating with other DA's offices and do a mental health court. So there's just so many things, but I just think that you need the experience. You have to be in the arena. You have to have been there. I'm there every single day. I have seen so many things throughout my 36 years, both as a prosecutor and defense lawyer. I bring all that to the table. I also bring experience, litigation experience. Courtroom is my home. That's my home court. It's like Fenway Park for me. That's where I am. It's where I feel most comfortable. I'm a courtroom. I am not a politician. I'm a trial lawyer. And as a trial lawyer, I want to lead by example. I want to train the best district attorneys and to be the best assistant DAs. I want to make the best law office in Western Massachusetts. I want to make sure that we incorporate the National College of District Attorneys Association to help train our staff. And at the same time, too, treat everybody equally with equality and justice for all. That's why I'm running on this campaign. And that's why I entered this race. You know, I've been doing this a long time. And I just know that there's so much I can offer this community. I can offer our county so much help that I can do to change so many things because I'm a doer. I've been there. I'm in there. I'm still in there. I'm still trying cases as late as last week. I'm still doing things. And I have tried so many cases, hundreds of cases over the last 36 years. And I can do that within you. I can walk in tomorrow and try a murder. And that's what I bring to the table. So I ask that, you know, on September 6th and starting August 27th, you vote for me for district attorney.
DA Harrington.
I'm very proud of the accomplishments of my office over the last 3.5 years. We have built a diverse team. We have handled multiple crises. We worked through a big backlog of cases when I took office. We made it through a global pandemic. We worked through another big backlog of cases, and we've done great work in the courtroom, but we've also worked for systemic change. And we have already done and proven that I say what I mean and I do what I say I'm going to do. And we have had a huge positive impact on communities across Berkshire County. We have limited the number of people that are acquiring criminal records. We know how devastating acquiring a criminal record is for people, and particularly people of color are negatively impacted by having criminal legal records. We have worked to get people treatment that they need. We have worked to ensure that victims feel heard. We have created a victim witness advocate program where we have Spanish speakers for the first time, where we have people of color so that we are communicating effectively with victims here in Berkshire County and building that trust. The trust between the community and law enforcement is at an all-time low. And we are really working with our community to ensure that we build that up so that we can protect public safety, so that we can solve our cases. Addressing the problem of the rise of hate and bias in our community is a huge public safety threat. I've joined the U.S. Attorney's Office Civil Rights Task Force. I'm the co-chair of the Law Enforcement Committee. I'm working on bringing more resources from the federal government so that we can make sure that we're addressing hate and bias here in our community and really changing the focus of law enforcement away from punitive war on drugs to supporting our community, to giving people better opportunities, paths to healthcare, and protecting people from violent crime.
Thank you very much to both candidates for your participation in this forum. There were many, many questions that we didn't get to, so it seems the community is hungry for more fora or debates. A reminder to folks that this is a primary election, which happens on September 6th. The voter registration deadline is 20 days prior to that, so you have just 2 more weeks to register online or postmark your voter registration. You can pre-register if you're under 18, but will be 18 by election day. And I'll hand it back to my NAACP colleagues to close it out.
So I'm going to hand it over to Dennis to close us out.
Thank you, Helen. And I really want to thank the 2 candidates. I want to thank Andrea Harrington, and I want to thank Attorney Shugrue for your presentation tonight, for the respect that you showed not only to our organization, but to each other. This is difficult work, and our job is to really inform or make sure that our community is informed. These are important elections, and I appreciate your participation. And as I said again, the respect that you had. I'm going to give you both an A- for tonight, which, believe me, is extremely high in comparison to our last forum. but thank you. I also want to thank the League of Women Voters of Central Berkshire County, the League of Women Voters of Williamstown, and the ACLU of Massachusetts for partnering with us in bringing this forum. What a difference a DA makes. And I also want to thank Helen Moon, the chair of our Political Action Committee, for organizing with her team this forum and the forum with respects to educating us about the importance of the sheriff. And again, I will say, if political action is your interest, Helen is still looking for a co-chair for this committee. Again, thank you, Helen, for the great job that you're doing. And a special thanks to Megan and all the support people that made this evening possible. And to all, please join us on August 17th as we host the debates between the candidates running for office of the sheriff and the DA office. These are two very, very important elections, positions. I've said it before and I'll say it again tonight in closing. Politics are local. Change happens on the local level. Local level politics can at times inform national politics. So please get involved, pay attention, go to the polls, vote your conscience, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?